now I think we're going to move on to talking about the form itself. And so I think Neelam's going to start by talking about the general approach to the application.
Yeah, so we've got a few questions that are similar, so I'll just read them out together. So one of the questions were how to strike a balance between expressing what shapes our identities, for example, disability, lived experience, or being from a marginalised group, with our clinical experience. Often feels like a compromise either way. And how to come across as unique when it feels as though I'm not. And do you have any ideas about how to stand out among so many impressive applicants with many years of experience?
I'm going to leap in there and just start. And I think a lot of people approach this by trying to think about themselves and then think about the ideal sort of applicant. And I think it's really easy to do that and to sort of try and find people that are on courses and try and sort of work out what it is about them that's kind of, you know, the quality that people are looking for. And actually you'll find if you do that, you'll find that there isn't one, because people are so different. If you look at clinical psychology trainees, they are so different. And so I think my advice to people, and the quote that I always used to put out, it's reflecting off the screen now, is that is to focus on yourself and to think that you're the only version of you that's applying to that course. You're the only one of you, so you are unique. And it's about trying to think about what you're bringing and how that is going to translate into you becoming a clinical psychologist. I mean, obviously you don't want to be too focused on yourself. You want to think about what you're actually applying for. But I think there's no point in trying to compare yourself to other people. It's really important just to think that you're you. Whatever happens, you're not going to change the fact that you're you. You might get more experience or more skills or whatever, but you're you. And whether you get onto the course or not, you're still you. And I think that's so important to hold on to, because I think it's really easy to lose that in this whole kind of process. So I'm going to zip up. I'm going to mute my microphone now, but that's what I wanted to say to you.
I think also it's really important to remember that even if you've had the same jobs, or you've had 2 AP jobs and everyone else has had 2 AP jobs, or that sort of thing, that may mean that's the same, but you took something different away from your job. And that's what's really important. And that's what makes it unique, is what you took away from the different experiences you've had. And even though other people might be able to list the same types of jobs or the same types of job roles and the same sort of places, they wouldn't have taken the same thing away. And often I found as well, the most interesting experience I had was also the most unique experience I had. So I really tried to think about just myself, rather than me compared to everyone else and all the other people applying. And that helped me when I was trying to think of more unique things to put in my application as well.
Yeah, I suppose when I was applying, I thought very much had in my mind a very kind of critical eyes on my application, and having met, obviously David, you're here as well, but having met the course staff, you know, their eyes aren't critical, and you know, they're looking to draw the best out of your form as well. And so just to kind of, as long as, I think everyone's saying, but as long as you can get you and you being you out onto it, and whether you choose to disclose kind of anything or not, it's really up to you. It's how you wish to get yourself across. And I think if you read different personal statements, everybody's is a bit different. So I don't think that there's one stock one that, you know, you should be writing, because that's what's going to get you on the course. It's about how you convey yourself, and kind of the reader, they can get a good image of you, I think, which is hard given the word count. It's a really tricky task, definitely.
I also just wanted to add, reflecting is really, really hard to do in such a limited number of characters, and to get yourself out in that limited character limit, it is hard. But I think one thing that I've learned from applying so many years is answering the question. And I think I was so focused the past few years trying to get myself out, trying to show that I'm really unique for the field, but I didn't answer the question. And that's probably where I fell down, and that's probably why I didn't get interviews. So I spoke to one of my colleagues the other day, and he was like, you didn't answer the question, and in several of the paragraphs. So think about what you're bringing and how that interweaves with the competencies of a clinical psychologist, and answer the question, make it explicit to the reader why you are prepared for the training. And in relation to your identity or what uniqueness you bring, again, link it back to the competencies. How does that link in with the role of a clinical psychologist? What is the role of a clinical psychologist? They don't want you to have they don't want you to be a clinical psychologist. They're going to train you to become a clinical psychologist. But what qualities, traits, skills do you already have that can help you be prepared for the role, for the role as a trainee? So yeah, I think that's what the learning points that I've taken from doing the application a few times, where I thought they wanted a complete package, but they don't want a complete package. They just want to know how you are prepared for the role as a trainee.
I think the other thing that you touch on there, Farhana, is the idea that they're not looking for the end product. What course teams are looking for is kind of trying to project how's this person actually going to be in the training, and so they're looking for your potential to develop both in all three of those aspects of the course, in terms of academic knowledge, clinical skills and research skills. So and that's, I think, when you're reflecting, it's about how did I develop through these different roles I've been in. You need to put in a little bit about what you did and the sort of kind of specific therapies or whatever you did, but that's not strictly what they're looking for. They're not looking for somebody who sort of has done every different type of therapy, worked with every different client group. They're looking for evidence of kind of how somebody develops in a situation. Should we move on then to the sort of specifics of the form itself? Farhana, are you going to take us through that one?
Yeah, so there were a couple of questions that I'm going to read out as well. So it's going to follow on quite nicely from the previous questions. So how do we reflect on our experiences and psychological theories we have applied in our work in such a limited word count? And any tips for limited characters? I'm struggling to decide what elements are priority and what won't make the final cut. Anyone have any thoughts around those questions?
I think it's really difficult, isn't it, to kind of work out. I just remember just battling with that word count all the time. I'm feeling it's kind of felt very unfair trying to kind of whittle down, especially as you go kind of on maybe a few years into applying, you're getting more and more experience, and it's really hard to decide what to put in. I suppose it's just that having that. So I try to make mine read like a narrative of development, and one that was reflection. I think it spoke really well about how we can then apply that on clinical training. So but it is, in terms of psychological theory, I think it's just showing themes of awareness of theory and how you related that to practice, and how you might well do that then on the course. But again, it's a difficult specific question to answer, because I think everyone's experience is very different. So it's about how you distill your experience and then place it on the form in a way that kind of, I think, sounds like a narrative. So it sounds like you're reading through something, and also sounds like it's you end up kind of sounding like someone who would do well on a course.
I think in regards to the word count, getting other people to read it is just what's really been helpful for me, in terms of they can see what words aren't really relevant, or how to make it a little bit more concise, sometimes more than I can, because I get really attached to my words because I wrote them. So I think just getting lots of people to read it can be really useful. And it doesn't have to be trainees or people in psychology, just other people like your partner or your housemate or whoever, just to help you with the wording of things, because there is so much you can get in if you really cut out all of the kind of context of things that you don't need that's covered elsewhere. And I think that's really, really hard to get your head around, because we're so used to job applications where you have to demonstrate every single thing how you meet the person specification. It's much more explicit, but once you get your head around it, I think then you start to become really ruthless with your words, and I think that's when more can come out in the form and you can fit more in and link in different things together as well.
I think sometimes what I say to people is that particularly when you get to that personal statement, you are completely the master of that. You can, you've already listed all the jobs you've done, so you can decide not to mention something at all. As you say, Alice, I think there's a temptation to kind of list everything in chronological order, but I think, and exactly what your duties were and everything, and it can just then read like a job description. But I always think when I'm reading them, you don't really want to know just the job description, because that, there probably been loads of people who've been in that job, the same job as you've done, and they've all done the same kind of duties. The job description's been the same. It's been about what have you learned? How has it contributed to your development? What skills did you develop? What even, going back to that question about psychological theories, how did you relate that situation you were in to what you knew about psychology from undergrad or your masters or whatever? What did you draw? And I think that, that it can sort of be useful information, although, as we've said, it's a challenge within the word count.
I think one thing that I learned from the word count when I initially started writing the applications was that I just wrote out my thoughts. And then I realized I went over the word count, and now I developed a new plan, which was to write down things that I've learned, the skills that I've learned and where I've learned it from, and how useful would it be in training. So I've planned it out, so then I don't, take over the word limit quickly, and then just think about, how can I phrase this? How can I link this skill with this skill, or this experience with this experience? So kind of intertwining the skills and, knowledge that you've taken from these different experiences. Just so it helps with my just so it helps me with my word count. So now that I've written my application this year, I noticed that I'm not going over my word count, and that planning stage really helped. So for someone who doesn't plan your application, plan your essays, and then go for it.
I suppose this is another point is this, I don't think I ever felt fully satisfied with any personal statement I ever sent off as well. So I think in some ways, just to keep that in mind as well as you might have, the hours you probably spent crafting something, it's just such a concise piece of writing that it's very hard to feel fully okay with it at any point. So at some point, you're just going to have to send it off as well.
That's good.
Yeah, and that's right. I don't think you'll be truly happy with your masterpiece, but once it's through, you've done it, and if it's meant to be, it'll be, and if not, you can always try again next year. So there are a few other questions, and I think some of you guys have touched on that. Does it matter how we structure the form with headings, bullet points, etc.? And how personal should we make the personal statement, including opinions and humor? Any thoughts, everyone?
Coming back to what you said, Farhana, about actually answering the question is really important in the structure, even coming back to it at the end of each paragraph, have I actually linking it to the question and what you've shown in that paragraph, about how you fit. I was just trying to think about the question and I forgot it. But yeah, making sure you answer it and keep it really tied to that is a really important thing for structure. And I've heard of some people doing it in terms of one bit about assessment, one bit about intervention or formulation, intervention, supervision. And I've also heard of people doing it in lots of different ways as well, but I don't think there is one expert way, is my view.
I think probably one thing to bear in mind is, although it's such an imbalance, because realistically you've probably spent hours and hours preparing this thing, but the reality is, I'm sorry to say it, but the reality is that the person reading it is going to spend 5 minutes at the most reading it. So I think any way that makes it easy for the person to, so that you're getting across what you're trying to get across without them having to kind of go backwards and forwards, and trying to keep it present it clearly to them. I think that's helpful. So say headings can help. Certainly, try not to sort of cram too much in. I don't know now whether you can do. When I applied in the dim and distant past, you could. It was all like typewritten, and people, you could really sort of cram in so much into the box. But you do need to. There's no point in sort of putting so much and having no breaks in it that you can't. It's just too difficult to make any sense of. So I think you do need to think about the person who's reading it as well. In terms of the thing about his personal statement, I think the personal statement, well, again, bear in mind that some courses put more weight on it than others, but I think for the courses that do look at it, I think that it is important because it's one of the things that kind of separates people. But my own view about humour is that, I don't know, people have different views, but I think and I don't know how many thousands of forms I would have read over the years, but I've rarely seen that come off. I have to say, I've seen a lot of people try and sort of put a humorous, and I can't really actually remember a single time where it seems to have come off. I think you're not, if you were applying for a kind of role as a stand-up comedian, then you do that. I think it comes from this thing about that I need to sort of do something. I need to be unique. I need to stand out. And they're not looking for somebody who's completely unique. I mean, who is? I don't know if there is anyone who's completely unique. They're looking for someone. What the person's doing is trying to see who are the people who are going to have got the most potential to be clinical psychology trainees and then clinical psychologists. So I think you don't need to sort of feel that you have to be so sort of different and out there. And I think there is a bit of a risk with trying to put humour in there. I think definitely put yourself in there. And we talked a bit earlier about identity, and as much as you're comfortable, I don't think people should disclose their own, feel forced to disclose kind of protected characteristics. But I do think you want to put something of yourself in there. And I suppose if humour is a big part of your life, then put it in if it's genuine. And that will give them a sense of yourself, but certainly don't feel that it's going to be a kind of key factor.
I think also going back to something that was mentioned earlier, there's so much pressure around this and so much comparison about how do I make my application shine or that little bit more better than the other person applying. And I think something that I've learned through the process is just do what you feel comfortable with and what you feel is sort of true to you. So only disclose as much as you feel comfortable for a stranger to read that about you, even though, it's anonymized. Just see where your comfort level lies. So even if you have an idea, just think about it. Think, well, is that something that I really want to disclose? Do I feel that this is something I want to talk about? And just see how you feel for a while before you do send off the application.
Okay, I'll go to my last question before I hand it over to James. What can I include in the publications section?
I remember I fortunate enough to have a publication, so I put that in, but I think I put posters in. I mean, to me, it's free word, so I just thought I'd throw in anything that I have been working hard on and kind of researched. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else put anything other than.
I put course manuals in that I've created or revised, and that it's just trying to think outside the box a little bit. And then presentations. Trying to think.
I did a lecture. I think I
think it's important just not to think, I haven't got a publication, I have nothing to put in here, because you definitely do have probably far more than you think. And if you feel like you don't, you can really easily write an article for the Psychologist online and probably get it published quite quick as well.
Great, thank you. I'll hand it over to James.
Okay, so we've had some questions about references. So I'll read out I've got two questions. I'll read them out individually. Is it best to have a clinical psychologist write your reference? What do people think about that?
Yeah, so the two questions are about the two referees, aren't they? And I mean, before we start talking about this, I mean, I think for me, the way references are used is a weakness of the system, and I think it can be another one of the barriers, the sort of things that contribute to sort of inequality in the system, because it kind of depends on who you've got access to write your references. And so I just say that before we get started. But the clinical, so there's two references, the clinical and the academic one. I think that what I would say is that it does help to have a clinical psychologist write the clinical reference, but not so much just purely because they're a clinical psychologist. I think the two key things you need from a referee, and again, this is an area that people don't think so much about, and so I would say you really do need to think about the referees, because often the forms look very similar. People have done similar jobs, similar everything, but the references do, they can be quite different. And the two things are that they need to know you, because if the person doesn't know you, they're really not going to write a good reference. And also they need to understand what they're writing for. And, because these are different types, these aren't normal kind of job application references. And in fact, I sort of suggested that they should be renamed letters of recommendation, because that's realistically what they are. They're not references in the sort of normal NHS job sense, because they do comment on your abilities, and realistically, the vast majority of them are very positive. So it's important that people understand that. So if it always makes my heart sink so much. The worst thing is you read a form and then you read the clinical reference and the person just said, oh, this is their duties. They've, this is what they, and it doesn't tell you what people are looking for. So I think your referee does need to know what people are looking for, and so the competencies that the people reading it are looking for. So that's why a clinical psychologist is normally going to be able to do that, but it doesn't mean that somebody else can't. But I think you need to really check that they that they do know what they're doing. And I think the clearinghouse does provide some guidance, and I think we've suggested that actually maybe more guidance would be helpful. So sometimes you might get caught, sometimes people are in a situation where they have a clinical psychologist that they have some dealings with and a supervisor who's not a clinical psychologist. So you get caught, one person knows you very well, one person doesn't really know you very well, but they're a clinical psychologist. In that instance, I think you've got to make a judgment. I would say it's better to get the person who knows you well, but get that person to talk to the clinical psychologist about what the reference says, what people are looking for.
I think it's just not being afraid to guide your referee as well. Just because they are doing you a favour doesn't mean you can't ask for them to do it really well. So I once sent my referee just a little bit of information on a letter of recommendation, just sort of saying that I just have heard that it's more like a letter of recommendation. I don't know if this might be helpful for you to read, just because she wasn't a clinical psychologist, so she may well not know. So I think it's just important to remember that you have the right to ask sort of how they're doing it, or to talk to them about how they're doing it, not just be so grateful that they're doing it that you just will take whatever, because it is your reference and it is your application. It is important.
So the second question we had was multiple years of experience, both clinical and research based, but now academic reference is now dated. Do I need to do a master's? So quite a specific question there. Anyone? David?
I think, again, that's a kind of similar kind of issue really, about how well the person knows you and also how much they can comment. I mean, people do face this. So it's a good question to answer, because as time goes by, I think I would say there's no harm in still using the same reference, but I think, as Alice mentioned, it's worth knowing what that reference is, and there's no harm in asking people to, I mean, they may not agree to share the reference with you, but it's not going to be great to be using the same reference year after year and you find actually it's not a very good reference. And I don't mean, when I say not a good reference, I don't mean that it says actually this person's wrote a load of rubbish. It means that they don't say enough about you, because that's obviously in this context what the reference is about. So I think having another referee, and you don't need to, I mean, you need to, for that academic reference that is particularly used for the research part of it and the kind of academic demands of the course. So you want to get someone who is able to comment on that. So, you know, you've done some ideally research with, really, but it doesn't necessarily have to be someone on a university course. I mean, it may be that you've done some research in your job, and particularly if it's with somebody who's used to supervising research and can comment on that, then I think that's perfect. I mean, people do use that person as a referee. So I think, you know, I certainly wouldn't do a master's just to get a reference, although if you do a master's and you do some good research and you've developed your skills, then you certainly would want to use that person as a referee, if that makes sense. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think definitely coming back to that point earlier of not doing a master's just to tick a box, just thinking about why you're doing it, and just to get an academic reference, unless there's lots of other reasons, may not be not be what you need to do.
And again, the same thing applies. I mean, as I said, the academic reference, I think people are more focused on, obviously, on the kind of research type side of things, but still, you know, again, this is where it's an advantage for people if the referee knows the process and they're involved in the process, which is why I think it contributes to inequity in the process. But, you know, if your person doesn't know the process very well, then you can do things to help them understand, you know, the kind of references that are written. Although actually in academic, these kind of letters of recommendation are more usual in academic settings anyway, so they should be able to understand that.
Great.
So and then the last one was about after you've sent the form. So Neelam, I think you were going to talk us through that one.
Yeah, so we have 2 questions here. So after you've finally gone through the process and hit send, how do you cope with the wait after the form has been submitted? And is it important to have a plan B?
Something I do is something I did last year, is applied before October 31st or whenever. So you save the £10, and also that it just gave me a bit more of a rest in between then and the tests, and I found that really helpful. So I'm definitely going to do that again this year. I felt like I was much more stressed when I sort of submitted at end of November, then it's Christmas, and then literally it feels like the tests are straight after Christmas. So it's just like managing. I was trying to think last year about how to manage the stress a bit better. So yeah, that's something I've done.
I was going to add self-care. So after I submitted my application, I went to San Francisco, I think, which is like full-on self-care. But it's really important to like really be compassionate to yourself and take care of yourself, because this year, the applying process, the interview process is draining, and you're really important and you come first. So I hope whatever I said has honed in the idea of really taking care of yourself, and especially like going into a field where you are under a lot of pressure and stress, and the doctorate is not a walk in the park. So, you know, learning how to take care of yourself is really important. So that's one thing that I've learned from applying as well, enjoying the ride and taking care of myself first and foremost, and don't stop your life for the profession.
Yeah, I'd echo the self-care element, even if it's a small act of self-care, but just recognizing also the achievement, you know, of actually sending off something for a doctoral course. It's a huge achievement to be applying anyway. Giving yourself credit for that. And yeah, I think keeping the self-care, because you'll need, like you said, you need it for the course, and holding on to that. And plan B, I suppose, just taking off, kind of talking about plan B a little bit, I noticed that I put a lot of pressure on myself when the doctorate was the everything, and I was kind of narrowed very much down my sights onto it, and actually having a very viable plan B. So for me, the year I got on, actually, I was going to kind of apply for a PhD. So, and that was actually in something I was very interested about and actually quite excited about. And instantly that took a lot of pressure off me. So for me, my plan B, I think, enabled me to be probably a better candidate on the day in the application as well. But yeah, I think, and maybe that's also taps into self-care as well as kind of trying to take off some of that pressure as well.
There's something about not allowing clinicals to sort of take over your whole life, and when you kind of put it in its box, in its place, of the fact that it's a 3-year contract, it's a course, it's not the be all and end all of you, your personality, your worth, or your life. I think there's something about when you put it in its place, it becomes a little bit less of a stressful process. I've certainly found my stress has always been, I feel like I can't buy a house until I'm on the doctorate. And then now I'm buying a house and I'm not on the doctorate, and I'm like breaking all my life rules. But there's something about trying to, just put it in its place and live your life anyway, because you can. It doesn't matter. You don't need to bend everything to fit in with that. It's a hard thing to convince yourself to do. And even as I go through this process buying this house, I can't imagine myself not putting 4 choices on the form. So it's a really difficult thing, but I don't know if anyone else struggles with that. That's certainly been my thing for the past couple of years.
I think I also just wanted to add, Plan B doesn't, the profession is really big. There are so many different roles that you can take up, such as PWP, a CBT therapist, counselling psychologist, if you can afford that. So there are different roles that you can take, and it's about kind of finding that out, doing your own research, and then enjoying the ride. And that ride might end up taking you to clinical psychology in like 10 years time, and that's not too late. So yeah, the world is your oyster. Go with the flow.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with that. And just to add on to that, I say that I'm even in that same boat as well, in just finding myself. And I feel like in terms of having a plan B, I think it's important in every aspect of your life anyways, not to just fixate yourself on, oh, this is what I want to be, this is who I should be. Because you never know. Like, I remember coming into university and everyone around me was like, oh yeah, I want to be a clinical psychologist. And then, like, where do we get that from? I think psychology is so broad, and I think it's just so important to take that time out to really explore. And I do that through volunteering, for example. I do it through speaking to people, platforms like this, when I listen to other people. And I think from just knowing how competitive I've heard the whole application process to be, like just kind of knowing yourself to then alter your behavior. So me as a person that I'm still wanting to go into that field, like my backup is counselling. Who knows, counselling might take me elsewhere, but that's just, do you see what I'm saying? It's just about, you'll find your feet, but just give that time to really just learn and like find yourself and find out if the field is really for you. Does it cater to your skills? Because that's, even for me, that's still a question that's running in my head.
Just made me think about, I don't know if you've heard about the Japanese concept of ikigai. I don't know how any of you familiar with that. Let me try so I can find it. Oh, it's on the back. It's about kind of, can you see that? I mean, the gist of it is finding out about yourself and finding out, what it is that what are your strengths, what are your things that you like doing, what are your values, and then finding, and that ikigai is when it's matched with something that you can be doing and be paid to do. And I think it's, it's so, I think as you were saying, Jocelyn, it's so easy for people just to focus on, this is a role, clinical psychology, and you kind of forget, well, what about me? And I think it's so important to be thinking about understanding what your own strengths are, what your own interests are, and thinking about the range of different possibilities that you can do. And as you go through that journey, you might find that as you develop, you're drawn more to one than the other. And it may be that as we said earlier, the reality is that not everyone is. That there are more applicants than places on clinical psychology courses, but that if you don't get accepted, you're still going to be all those strengths and interests are still the same. It's, you know, you don't lose those. And so I think it's so important to be able to think about how that's developing, and then what the different ranges, and as I think, as you were saying, have a broad mind about it, because I think if you get very narrowly focused, then you know, it doesn't serve you well. And of course, you know, the reality is that process doesn't, you know, we're focusing very much in this whole discussion on you know, just the getting onto the course, but it doesn't stop once you get on the course, you know, because once you get on the course, you have choices about different paths to taking in clinical psychology, you know, you get to the point, and then sometimes, you know, you'll then be sort of thinking about, well, I want to be working in this area of clinical psychology, I want this job, and you know, you can't sort of tie your whole sort of self to a particular role, because you never know what's going to happen. And I know that from my own experience. I was in a particular role, and then you know, ended up not being made redundant from that role. So it was, you know, that, you know, you need to be aware of kind of what you're bringing from wherever job you're in, whatever thing you're on, your own sort of developmental journey. Great. How about that perfect timing? We're actually, this 9 o'clock exactly. What an amazing thing. We managed to get through all the questions. I think, was there anything that people felt we didn't cover?
I think we did well.
Yeah, I think you did amazingly well. Yeah, I've got a feeling that I just need to edit everything I said out of it, and it'll be perfect now. But
oh, everything that you said was very handy and useful, David.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It didn't sound like waffling.
No, it's not babbling.
That was good that you it all came in. I think, no, it was good. I think it'll be, I think people will find it helpful. I think we covered a lot of ground, didn't we? And I think when we edit it down, it will be sort of, you know, won't be too long for people to access. Yeah, no, I think it's really good.
I think it's also helpful that it's going to be online as well, because even myself, once it's done, I want to watch this again just to get down notes this time.
For sure. Yeah.
I don't ever want to watch this. I never want to know what I sounded.
I thought you sounded great, actually. You came up with some really brilliant points. I think